The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows over the small town as Tami Hayes walked through the automatic doors of the local grocery store. The air inside smelled faintly of fresh-baked bread and the dusty scent of the outdated fluorescent lights flickering above. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind that felt like everyone was either winding down or hiding from the oppressive heat outside. Tami wasn't exactly in a hurry, but she wasn't interested in making small talk either. She moved through the aisles with an ease born of years of routine. The hum of the store, the shuffle of her shoes on the linoleum floor, and the occasional chatter of the few other customers faded into a comfortable backdrop. She wasn't a stranger in this place, though she didn't really make her presence known. Tami preferred it that way, small, unassuming, almost invisible. She knew the staff, of course. They had seen her come in and out countless times. They knew her face, knew her name from the small bookstore she owned down the street, but they never asked her for more than that. It wasn't like she was hiding anything. Tami Hayes was hardly the picture of wealth. In fact, she was one of the last people anyone would expect to have a fortune. She dressed simply, often in muted sweaters and soft jeans, the kind of clothes that blended in with the crowd. She didn't wear flashy jewelry, didn't drive an extravagant car, didn't even flaunt the things that came with her family's old money. Instead, she lived like she was still the same awkward, bookish girl she had been when she first moved to the town years ago. She picked up a loaf of bread from the shelf, her fingers brushing against the crust as she thought about the meals she'd be preparing that week. It wasn't much, just the usual, some canned goods, fruit, a gallon of milk. Her diet was simple, not out of necessity, but because she didn't know what else to do with all the abundance. The clutter of wealth that she inherited was something she had never quite found a way to handle. The sound of footsteps approached behind her, but she didn't look up. She had no reason to. A cart rolled by, its wheels squeaking, and she could feel the person moving past her. She briefly wondered if they noticed her, if anyone did, for that matter. But that didn't matter much to her, not today. When she reached the checkout, she grabbed a basket and placed her items on the counter. The young cashier, a man in his 20s with tattoos peeking out from under his sleeves, glanced up from his phone. He didn't recognize her at first, but then his eyes lingered on her for a second longer than usual. He gave her a quick smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. A moment of polite recognition, nothing more. Tami didn't feel the need to make conversation. She just slid her items toward him and stood there, her eyes drifting to the far end of the counter where the impulse buy magazines were stacked. Her fingers absently traced the edge of a magazine cover, letting the minutes slip by. "Cash or card?" the cashier asked, his voice muffled by the soft hum of the overhead lights. "Cash," Tami replied quietly. The man nodded, swiping the items into the register. Tami's fingers brushed the coins in her purse, feeling their cool weight against her palm. It was a habit, this small ritual of counting out exactly the right amount. She knew people found it odd. There were plenty of times when she could have used a card, plenty of times when it would have been easier. But Tami had always preferred it this way. Simple, direct, no fuss. As she pulled a handful of coins from her purse, the cashier raised an eyebrow. Tami's hand paused mid-air, her fingers brushing against a nickel. She quickly dropped it into the tray, her fingers trembling just slightly as she fished for more. One by one, she counted out the exact change, paying for her groceries in coins, as she always did. The moment was small, but in the quiet of the store, it seemed to echo. A few heads turned. Tami heard the sound of a laugh, a quick, dismissive chuckle from the young cashier. She didn't look up, but she felt it. The energy in the air shifted as he glanced at the coins, then back at her, and then at his coworker. The other cashier, a woman in her 30s, didn't make a sound, but the look she gave was one Tami knew well. It was the look of someone who had seen it all before, someone who wasn't surprised at the oddities of small-town life. But still, the laugh lingered. Tami could feel their eyes on her. "Coins, huh?" the cashier said, his voice louder than before, a mix of disbelief and amusement. "Well, that's a first." Tami kept her gaze on the register, refusing to meet his eyes. She didn't let the judgment get to her. She had faced it before many times, in fact. The way people noticed her frugality, the way they would comment on how cheap she was or how unusual it was for someone like her to shop this way. She could feel the weight of it in the air, the subtle mockery that she had come to expect in this small town. But there was more to it than just coins and groceries. More than the judgment. She could almost hear the laughter in her ears, the cashier's smirk, the quiet snickers of the customers behind her. They didn't know anything about her. They didn't know about the Bugatti she had parked in the far corner of the lot. They didn't know about her family's wealth, the fortune that was meant to remain hidden, tucked away behind walls of modesty and simplicity. Still, she counted the coins one by one, until they were all on the counter. The cashier's amusement seemed to falter slightly as he began to scan the coins into the register. But there was no apology, no acknowledgement of what had just transpired. When the transaction was finished, Tami took her change, slowly placing it back into her purse. She gathered her bags, her hands moving with deliberate care. The store had gone quiet again, the laughter fading into the background noise of the store. She turned to walk away, her back straight, her steps firm, though a small part of her wanted to turn and leave, wanted to hide, but she didn't. Instead, she walked out of the store with as much dignity as she could muster. The cool air hit her face as she stepped outside. She let it fill her lungs, a brief moment of calm. She didn't need to look back. She knew what she would see. People continuing to laugh at her, to mock her for being too simple, too modest, for not fitting into their version of who she should be. But as she walked toward her car, parked in the far corner, the world felt different. The breeze seemed to push her forward, encouraging her to keep going, to not let their judgments weigh her down. She reached the corner of the parking lot and paused, her hand resting on the trunk of her car. She looked over at the sleek Bugatti, its dark blue finish gleaming in the sunlight. No one knew it was hers. No one knew that the simple, unassuming woman they had just mocked was the one who owned the very thing they admired from afar. With a deep breath, Tami climbed into her car. As she started the engine, the sound was low and steady. Her heart was steady too, though the laughter still rang in her ears. She knew, deep down, that it was only a matter of time before the world saw her for who she truly was. And when they did, there would be no more coins, no more laughter. She drove away, and with each passing mile, the weight of their judgment lifted just a little more. The sound of Tami's tires crunching over the gravel driveway seemed louder than usual as she approached her home. Her small house, tucked away in the corner of town, was a far cry from the grandeur of some of the homes on the other side. The neighbors often called it charming, a polite way of saying it was a bit too modest. But Tami didn't mind. The house was hers, bought and paid for, and that was enough. The faded shutters, the chipped paint on the porch, the overgrown ivy crawling up the side. All these little imperfections had become part of her world. They weren't a sign of neglect but of quiet contentment. Tami had learned to take pride in simplicity, to embrace a life that didn't need to be flashy or admired. She had a routine here, a rhythm she followed. The creak of the old wooden floors, the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen, the sound of pages turning as she lost herself in the books she sold. These were the things that mattered to her, the small things. As she parked her car in the driveway, Tami glanced at the small garage next to her house. It wasn't much, just a space for the clutter she didn't know what to do with. Old boxes, half-finished projects, and tools she had inherited from her father. But behind the mess, hidden away from sight, was something that no one knew about. She had kept it a secret, not because she was ashamed, but because it was hers to keep. The car, the Bugatti, was her inheritance from a family that had made their fortune in ways that were both admired and criticized. The kind of wealth that made people uncomfortable if they saw it too much. So, Tami had decided to keep it tucked away. The car was a symbol of her past, of the legacy she had inherited but never asked for. As she stepped out of her car and walked toward the garage, the weight of the day pressed down on her. The laughter still echoed in her mind, and the mocking tone of the cashier replayed over and over. But here, in this quiet corner of her life, Tami could find a moment of solace, a moment of peace. She unlocked the garage door with the soft click of the key turning in the lock. The door creaked as it opened, revealing the sleek, polished Bugatti, its dark blue exterior gleaming in the dim light. It had been months since she had driven it. The car was a work of art, something to be admired and respected. But to Tami, it was just a car. Another piece of her life that had been shaped by family expectations and silent judgment. She stepped inside, the scent of leather and polished metal filling the air. Her fingers brushed over the smooth surface of the car, a gesture both familiar and strange. She had never gotten used to the luxury of it, never quite felt comfortable behind the wheel of something so extravagant. But she had lent it to her close friend, Linda, a few months ago. Linda had needed it for a business deal, something big, and Tami had agreed to let her borrow it. Tami couldn't remember exactly when she had stopped using the car. She had driven it for a while when she felt like testing the waters, but it had never quite felt right. She wasn't the kind of person who craved attention, and the car brought more attention than she was willing to deal with. But now, as she stood in front of it, she felt a surge of something unfamiliar. A mixture of frustration, longing, and quiet pride. She had always hidden behind modesty, always downplayed her success. But there was a part of her that wanted to scream, to show the world that she was more than what they saw. That she wasn't just the woman who paid for groceries in coins. She was so much more than that. She ran her hand along the door, feeling the coolness of the metal beneath her fingers. The car was a symbol of everything she had tried to hide. Her family's wealth, her quiet rebellion against the expectations that had been placed on her, the pressure to live up to something bigger than herself. But the truth was, she wasn't sure who she was anymore. Was she the woman who bought groceries with coins, or was she the woman who owned a Bugatti? The sound of the door opening behind her broke her thoughts. Tami turned, startled, to see Linda standing in the doorway of the garage, smiling sheepishly. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you," Linda said, stepping inside. "I just wanted to return the car. The deal went through, and I thought I'd bring it back to you." Tami nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Linda was one of the few people who knew about the car, but even she didn't fully understand the weight of what it represented. To Linda, the Bugatti was just a luxury car, a symbol of success. But to Tami, it was so much more. It was a reminder of everything she had tried to avoid, everything she had tried to bury deep inside. "It looks like you took good care of it," Tami said, her voice quiet but warm. "Thanks for bringing it back." Linda laughed. "You know me, I'd never let something this beautiful sit around. I got a lot of compliments. People were staring at it like I was someone important." Tami felt a pang in her chest at Linda's words, but she didn't let it show. She couldn't let it show. She had spent too long hiding behind her humility to admit to anyone, even Linda, that there was more to her than what met the eye. "I think I'll take it for a spin later," Tami said, her words coming out more confidently than she felt. "Just to clear my head." Linda raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She knew better than to press Tami on things she wasn't ready to talk about. "All right, I'll leave you to it then," Linda said, turning to head back to the door. "Just don't let it sit here for too long. You deserve to enjoy it." As Linda stepped out of the garage, Tami stood there for a long moment, the weight of her words settling over her. She deserved to enjoy it. But what did that even mean? What did it mean to enjoy something when you were always worried about what people would think? Tami didn't know if she could ever fully embrace the life she had been given, the wealth, the power, the expectations. But something inside her, something deep and buried, began to stir. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. She closed the garage door behind her, locking it with a soft click. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. But for the first time in a long while, it felt like the quiet was on her side. The town was still basking in the soft warmth of the evening when Tami made her way home. The streetlights flickered to life as she turned onto her block, the familiar, comforting sight of her small house looming just ahead. She could feel the weight of the day settling over her, and a strange restlessness began to creep in. The laughter from the grocery store earlier that afternoon had followed her, echoing through her mind like a dull ache. It wasn't just the laughter itself that bothered her. It was the fact that it made her question everything. Why had she let it affect her? Why had she allowed them to make her feel so small, so invisible? She parked her car in the driveway, the sound of gravel crunching beneath the tires almost too loud in the stillness of the evening. With a sigh, she grabbed the grocery bags and walked toward the porch. The weight of the groceries was familiar, but the weight in her chest felt different this time. It wasn't just the burden of her purchases, but the weight of her thoughts, the heaviness of all that she carried within her and refused to share with anyone. Inside, the house was quiet. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of a clock in the hallway. Tami set the bags down on the kitchen counter and began to unpack. She moved slowly, methodically, almost as if the act of putting away the groceries could somehow distract her from the emotions swirling within her. But it didn't. The laughter from the store had followed her here, too. She could still hear it in her head, still see their faces, the cashier's smirk, the way the other customers had exchanged looks as she counted out coins. It wasn't just about the coins, though. It was about how they saw her, how they always saw her. It wasn't the first time she'd felt this way. Her ex-husband had made her feel small, too, always pointing out how simple she was, how she didn't know how to enjoy the finer things in life. His words still echoed in her mind, too. You're too humble for your own good. And maybe he was right. Maybe her modesty had kept her from fully stepping into the life that had been handed to her. She didn't know. But the truth was, Tami had never wanted to stand out. She had always been content with the background. A quiet observer, never the star of the show. She had been okay with that. Or at least she had convinced herself she was. As she put away the last of the groceries, Tami walked to the window and gazed out at the street. The town was peaceful at this hour. It always was. But even in the quiet of the evening, Tami couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She thought of the Bugatti, sitting silently in the garage, a symbol of everything she had worked so hard to ignore, a reminder of what she had kept hidden. She knew the car was a mark of privilege. She knew it made people uncomfortable. But what bothered her most wasn't the car itself. It was the fact that she was constantly reminded of it by the very people who didn't see her for who she really was. They saw her as a bookshop owner, a simple woman, a woman who could pay for groceries in coins. Tami's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Startled, she walked toward the front door, her feet dragging slightly as if she didn't want to answer it. She opened the door to find Elaine, the woman from church, standing on the porch with a casserole dish in her hands. Elaine was the kind of woman who always wore a smile and a kind word for everyone, no matter how badly she might be hurting inside. Tami had always admired her. But at the same time, Elaine's perfect, warm exterior made Tami feel like she could never measure up. "Evening, Tami," Elaine said brightly, holding out the casserole dish. "I made this for you. Figured you could use a little comfort food after today." Tami forced a smile, taking the dish from her. "Thanks, Elaine. That's really kind of you." Elaine stepped inside, her cheerful voice filling the room as she began to make herself at home, as if she had done it 100 times before. Tami didn't mind. She liked Elaine, though she sometimes felt like Elaine's perfect, wholesome life only reminded her of the things she lacked. The perfect family, the perfect home, the perfect life. "I heard about your little grocery store incident today," Elaine continued as she set the dish down on the counter. "That must have been embarrassing. People can be so rude sometimes." Tami felt a pang of irritation, but she swallowed it down. Elaine didn't mean any harm. She was just trying to be kind, to offer some sympathy. But the fact that Elaine had heard about it so quickly made Tami's stomach twist. "It wasn't really a big deal," Tami replied, her voice flat. "It happens all the time." Elaine paused, her bright smile faltering for just a moment. "Oh, honey, don't let them get to you. People like that, they don't know what they're talking about. You've got more class than any of them." Tami forced a smile, but inside, she was seething. Class? What did that even mean? Was it about how you dressed? The car you drove? The money you had? Was class something you could measure by your appearance or your actions? Thanks, Tami said quietly, the words feeling hollow in her mouth. I'll keep that in mind. Elaine didn't seem to notice the change in Tami's mood. She was too busy talking about the church bake sale and the upcoming Sunday potluck. Tami half listened, nodding along, her mind wandering to thoughts of the Bugatti sitting in the garage. As Elaine left, Tami closed the door behind her and stood there for a moment, the silence in the house feeling heavier than before. The casserole dish sat on the counter, a small act of kindness that felt both thoughtful and condescending. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate the gesture. It was just that Quiet street. The laughter from the grocery store returned, faint but persistent, ringing in her ears. She had spent so many years hiding, so many years letting people see her as something she wasn't. She had spent so many years making herself small, just to fit into a world that didn't understand her. But the truth was, she was tired of hiding. She was tired of being the woman everyone underestimated. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop hiding behind the coins, behind the humility, behind the bookshop. Maybe it was time to drive the Bugatti. The next morning, Tami woke up early, long before the town stirred to life. The early hours always felt like the best time to think, to plan, to prepare herself for the day ahead. The house was still dark, save for the soft glow of the kitchen light, which bathed the room in a calming golden hue. It was quiet, peaceful, and for a moment, Tami let herself enjoy the stillness. She stood in front of the window with a cup of coffee in her hands, watching the sun slowly rise above the horizon. There was something serene about these moments, something that grounded her. As the warm liquid slid down her throat, Tami's thoughts wandered back to the day before. The laughter at the store, Elaine's visit, the casserole. She tried to shake off the discomfort, but it was still there, gnawing at her. The judgment, the assumptions, the way people thought they knew who she was. The way they thought she had no right to anything more than a modest life. She wasn't sure why, but something about it felt like it was starting to wear thin. Her entire life had been about playing small, about staying out of the spotlight, and letting everyone else take center stage. But lately, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing out on something. The thought of the Bugatti in the garage returned to her mind. It was a strange thing. This car she owned, this symbol of everything she had inherited but never claimed. It wasn't that she wanted to flaunt it, but there was a part of her that longed to show the world who she really was. To stop hiding, to stop pretending she was just another quiet, overlooked woman. With a deep breath, Tami set the coffee cup down on the counter and stood up straighter. Maybe today was the day she would stop letting the world define her. She walked slowly toward the garage, her heart beating a little faster as she approached the door. She could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the distance, but in the garage, it was quiet. She unlocked the door and let it creak open, the smell of dust and leather filling the air as the Bugatti came into view. The car sat there, as sleek and polished as it had been when she first drove it out of the dealership years ago. It was more than just a car to her. It was a legacy, a symbol of everything she had kept hidden. The wealth, the expectations, the pressures of being the quiet daughter of a family that had built its fortune on silence and subtlety. But standing there, looking at the Bugatti, Tami felt a surge of something inside her. It wasn't pride, not yet. It was something else, something deeper, more powerful. She could feel the weight of the judgment she had carried for so long, but now it didn't seem so heavy. She walked closer, running her fingers gently over the sleek metal. The coolness of it, the smoothness of it, felt almost foreign. She had spent so much time pushing this part of her life aside, never quite allowing herself to enjoy it. But today, that felt like it was going to change. Tami had always kept the Bugatti hidden in the garage, away from the prying eyes of the world. She didn't want to attract attention, didn't want people to think she was showing off. But today, something shifted in her. It wasn't about showing off. It was about claiming something that had always been hers. She slid into the driver's seat, her fingers wrapping around the smooth, cool wheel. The leather felt soft beneath her touch, and the hum of the engine came to life beneath her. She had driven the car a few times, but always with hesitation. Always with the nagging feeling that people were watching her, judging her. But now she felt different. More grounded, more certain of herself. Tami turned the key, and the engine purred to life. A low, confident growl that made her heart beat a little faster. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The car was beautiful, powerful, but it wasn't the car that had been holding her back all this time. It was the fear of being too much. The fear of people seeing her for what she truly was, and not what they thought she should be. She shifted the car into gear and slowly pulled out of the garage, the sunlight catching on the polished exterior as she drove out into the street. The town was still quiet, still waking up. But for Tami, it felt like everything had shifted. As she cruised down the empty street, the wind in her hair and the hum of the engine beneath her, Tami couldn't help but smile. She wasn't just driving a luxury car. She was driving towards something much bigger. Something that had always been inside her, waiting to be recognized. The laughter from the store earlier didn't bother her anymore. The quiet mockery, the judgment. It was all still there, but it no longer had power over her. She had spent so many years hiding, so many years letting people see her as something she wasn't. But today she was done hiding. She drove past the familiar landmarks, past the corner store, the little cafe she frequented, the library where she had spent so many hours as a child. But today, they looked different. Today, she saw them with new eyes. The world felt a little bigger, a little more expansive. Tami made a slow turn down a side street, heading towards the park. She had no real destination in mind, but it didn't matter. The simple act of driving, of letting the car carry her forward, felt freeing in a way she hadn't expected. The park was quiet, save for a few joggers and a couple of parents with strollers. She pulled into the empty parking lot and parked beneath a large oak tree. The shadows of the branches stretched across the pavement, creating a serene, peaceful scene. Tami sat there for a moment, just looking at the trees and the soft grass. This was her moment, the moment where she chose to stop hiding, the moment where she claimed her power. It wasn't about the car, not really. It was about the quiet strength that had always been there, waiting to be recognized. She stepped out of the car and closed the door behind her. The air was cool, the world still untouched by the chaos of the day. For the first time in a long time, Tami felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The world would see her. They would see her for who she truly was, and she would no longer apologize for it. The morning after Tami's drive, the town's rhythm continued as it always did, without hesitation. People filed in and out of their homes, starting their day as if nothing had changed. But to Tami, everything felt different. The quiet strength that had once been buried deep inside her now felt like something she could tap into at will, like an unseen muscle she had just learned to stretch. As she sat at the front desk of her bookstore, sorting through a pile of new arrivals, her mind wandered back to the park, where she had left the Bugatti parked beneath the oak tree. It hadn't been a grand gesture. She hadn't set out to make some kind of statement. But as she sat there, listening to the murmurs of the early customers flipping through books, she realized that something had shifted. Tami glanced up to see a familiar face walking through the door. Linda, her close friend and the one person who knew the most about her personal life, was there. Linda was a whirlwind of energy, always in motion, always brimming with ideas. It was one of the reasons Tami had connected with her so easily. Where Tami was quiet and introspective, Linda was loud, confident, and outwardly successful. Linda had a small business of her own, a flower shop that had become a staple in the town, and Tami admired her ability to embrace the world without hesitation. "Morning, Tami," Linda greeted, her voice carrying through the bookstore, drawing a few glances from the customers. "You're up early as always." Tami smiled and waved her in, setting aside the book she was working on. "Good morning, Linda. What brings you here?" Linda's eyes twinkled with excitement. "Just wanted to catch up with my favorite bookworm. I need to get a new copy of Pride and Prejudice. It's been years, and I think I've lost my old one." Tami laughed softly. Pride and Prejudice had always been Linda's go-to book. It was one of those little quirks about her that Tami loved. As Linda browsed the shelves, her eyes wandered over to the counter, where a stack of magazines sat. Her gaze shifted from the books to the small corner where a single magazine featuring Tami's family name lay open. "So, did you see this?" Linda asked, pointing toward the article. "It's all over town." Tami's heart skipped a beat. She walked over and glanced at the magazine cover, her eyes immediately landing on her family name, Hayes, a name that had carried weight in business circles long before she had ever considered running a bookstore. The article was a profile piece about the history of her family's business legacy in the town. It was a casual piece, mostly focused on the history of the Hayes family and their role in the town's development. Linda was still talking, but Tami couldn't hear her over the sound of her own thoughts. The article spoke about wealth, about the kind of power her family had accumulated over generations. But it also spoke of humility, the same quiet humility that Tami had spent her life hiding behind. Her family's story was often portrayed in a way that made their wealth seem like something to be proud of. But for Tami, it felt like a burden. "Yeah, I saw it," Tami replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's nothing new. Just some old news they like to bring up from time to time." Linda stopped in her tracks, turning to face her. "Tami, you are your family's legacy. You've built something on your own. A bookstore, a successful one. Why do you always act like it's not a big deal?" Tami felt a familiar flush of discomfort. She had never quite learned how to handle praise or recognition. It always felt too big, too out of place. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "It just feels out of reach, like something I'm not really supposed to have." Linda raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. "Tami, if you only knew how much people talked about you behind your back. They think you're just this quiet little shopkeeper. They think you've got nothing to offer except books and a little charm. But you're so much more than that. You've got everything to offer. People see the quiet, humble side of you, but they don't realize what's inside." Tami felt the weight of Linda's words, but she didn't know how to respond. Everything to offer? What did that even mean? What was she supposed to do with that? As Linda continued talking about the shop's latest sales and the upcoming festival, Tami let her mind wander. She couldn't stop thinking about how people saw her, how the world thought of her as just the quiet bookstore owner, the woman who paid for groceries in coins. But there was more to her. There was always more. Tami walked to the back of the store, needing a moment alone. The hum of the fluorescent lights above her felt like a constant reminder of the pressure she had carried her whole life. But in the quiet of the back room, as she rearranged a few boxes of old books, something began to shift. She realized that, for the first time, she was beginning to see herself differently. She was no longer just the quiet shopkeeper. She wasn't just the woman who hid behind humility. She had built something real. Her bookstore, small as it was, had survived because of her, not her family's name. People came here because of her, because of the quiet strength she had cultivated over the years. She had done this, and she deserved to stand tall because of it. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. There was something about owning this moment, about fully realizing who she was, that felt liberating. She wasn't hiding anymore. When she returned to the front, Linda was already talking to a customer. But her words still echoed in Tami's mind. People see the quiet, humble side of you, but they don't realize what's inside. That was the truth, and it was time she let the world see it. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. Tami found herself walking through the same familiar streets of town, but this time, everything looked different. Her usual route to the bookstore was no longer just a path of routine. It had transformed into a journey of self-reflection. She hadn't yet fully embraced the power she'd begun to tap into, but the change was unmistakable. It was as if the world around her was shifting, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but enough for her to notice. She could feel it in the way people greeted her. There was a subtle shift in the air, a warmth she hadn't felt before. It wasn't that she was being treated any differently, not exactly. But there was an undercurrent of respect that had been missing for so long. It was like the people around her were starting to notice her in a way they hadn't before. Her steps felt lighter, and her heart, though still carrying the weight of her past, began to feel a little freer. It all culminated one afternoon when she received a phone call from a local business owner, Malcolm Porter, who ran the town's largest cafe. Tami had known Malcolm for years. He was an affable man, always quick with a joke or a kind word. They'd shared a few conversations over coffee, but their paths didn't cross often. "Hey, Tami," Malcolm's voice boomed over the phone. "You got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" Tami replied, unsure what the call was about. "Well, I've been thinking," Malcolm began, his voice lowering to a more serious tone. "I've got a situation over here, and I could really use your help. I heard about what you did for the library last week, helping them with that donation. That was huge, Tami. I mean, you really stepped up for them. I think you're just the right person for this job." Tami frowned, not sure where this conversation was headed. "What do you mean? What job?" Malcolm paused, then took a deep breath. "I've got an offer from the local food supplier to buy a piece of my cafe. It's a big deal, Tami. I'm talking about some serious expansion, maybe even opening a few more locations. But there's one catch. They want someone who knows how to handle business. Someone with a strong head on their shoulders. And you, well, I know you're not exactly flaunting it, but I know you've got what it takes. You've built a successful business on your own." Tami's heart skipped a beat. Her initial reaction was to say no, to shy away from the spotlight once again. She had spent so many years hiding behind her books, behind the walls of her bookstore. She wasn't a businesswoman in the traditional sense. But then she thought of all the people who had underestimated her. The years spent in the background, quietly observing, waiting for her moment. "You're asking me to help you expand your cafe?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, though she was doing her best to sound composed. "I'm asking you to help us take the next step," Malcolm clarified. "You know the town, you know what people like, and you know how to get things done. You've got a vision. I can see it. I know you can bring something special to the table. I trust you." Tami sat back in her chair, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always been the quiet observer, always content to stay in the background, away from the limelight. But now there was an opportunity in front of her. An opportunity to be part of something bigger than herself. To step into a world that had always felt just out of reach. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice quiet, but there was a hint of something else in it. A quiet determination that she hadn't heard before. "Take your time," Malcolm replied, "but don't wait too long. This opportunity won't be here forever." The call ended, and Tami sat there for a moment, the phone still pressed to her ear. She looked out the window of her bookstore, watching the world go by. She had spent so much time hiding, so much time doubting herself, but now there was a chance for her to make a real difference. To be seen not just as the quiet bookstore owner, but as someone capable of shaping the future of this town. She had been underestimated for so long, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop letting that hold her back. Later that day, as Tami walked through the town square, she noticed something unusual. The streets, which had once seemed so familiar, now felt like they were filled with possibilities. She noticed how the cafe, the one that Malcolm owned, was bustling with customers, the air thick with the sounds of laughter and conversation. It was the kind of place where everyone gathered, a hub for the community. It was a place where people shared stories, and maybe even dreams. Her thoughts drifted back to the conversation with Malcolm. The idea of expanding the cafe, of being part of something larger, stirred something inside her. The prospect of growth, of taking something that already had roots and nurturing it into something even bigger, excited her in a way she hadn't expected. As she walked past the cafe, she saw Malcolm standing behind the counter, greeting customers with his usual charm. When he saw her, he waved enthusiastically, and she smiled back, offering a small nod of acknowledgement. It was a subtle shift, but Tami felt it. The world around her was changing, and she too was changing. She didn't have all the answers. She wasn't sure if she was ready to take on such a big role, but she did know one thing. This was her moment. It was time for her to stop hiding in the shadows, to stop letting the world dictate who she was. She had spent so many years letting others see her as small, as insignificant, but she was beginning to realize something important. She was anything but that. She had something to offer, and it was time for her to step into the light. The following day, Tami drove to the cafe, her mind racing with possibilities. As she parked the Bugatti in the lot, she felt a surge of excitement. This was more than just a car. It was a symbol of the life she had tried to hide, the success she had worked so hard to downplay. Today, she was going to let the world see it. She walked into the cafe, her footsteps purposeful, and Malcolm looked up from behind the counter. The moment he saw her, his face lit up with recognition. "I'm in," Tami said, her voice steady, her decision made. "Let's do this." Malcolm smiled wide, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Welcome aboard, Tami. I knew you had it in you." And in that moment, Tami felt something shift deep inside her. It wasn't about the cafe. It wasn't about the Bugatti or the business. It was about her. For the first time, she was stepping into her own power, no longer hiding behind the shadows of self-doubt or the expectations of others. She was ready to show the world who she truly was. A week passed since Tami had agreed to join Malcolm in expanding his cafe. The days seemed to flow differently now, like a current that had been moving sluggishly, only to suddenly rush forward with unexpected speed. She found herself back in the CAF, outsider in a room full of entrepreneurs. She wasn't just the quiet woman from the bookstore anymore. Tami was in the conversation, a valuable part of the team. The respect she had craved for so long had begun to show itself in ways she hadn't anticipated. The cafe's loyal customers greeted her with newfound warmth, nodding in recognition when they saw her in the cafe, or when they casually mentioned her name while talking about upcoming events. But despite all the progress, there was a strange undercurrent, a feeling of growing unease in Tami. Her new position, while empowering, was still fragile. She felt the weight of the expectations on her shoulders. She had always been good at blending in, being quiet, but now she was being asked to stand tall, to make decisions, to shape the future of something bigger than her. One afternoon, as she sat in the cafe with a notebook, making notes on the latest draft of their marketing plan, the door chimed. Tami looked up, expecting to see one of the regulars, but instead, it was someone she didn't recognize. An older man with graying hair and a stern expression. He walked up to the counter, where Malcolm greeted him with a firm handshake. Tami glanced over at them, noticing the way Malcolm seemed to straighten his posture and the way the man's demeanor instantly shifted the tone in the room. She could feel the tension hanging in the air. "Afternoon, Malcolm," the man said, his voice low and steady. "This is the place I've been hearing about, huh?" Malcolm smiled, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yes, sir. It's the place. Can I get you anything?" The man's gaze lingered on Tami for a moment before returning to Malcolm. He didn't smile. There was something calculating in his eyes, something that made Tami's skin crawl slightly. Tami tried to focus on her notes, but her thoughts were scattered. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She had heard whispers about the man, but she hadn't paid much attention. A local businessman, apparently, who had an interest in buying properties in the area, including Malcolm's cafe. She had thought little of it, not wanting to let her suspicions cloud the excitement she felt in working alongside Malcolm. But now, with the way the conversation was unfolding, she couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in her gut. She caught a few snippets of their conversation as they continued talking, the man's voice firm and somewhat condescending. "I'm telling you, Malcolm, we're offering a good price here," the man said. "You won't get a better deal. The market's shifting. The offer I'm making is generous. Don't be foolish." Malcolm's response was guarded, but Tami could see the hesitation in his eyes. This was something bigger than she had expected. The cafe, the business that had been a community staple, could very well be in danger. The tension between Malcolm and the man grew more palpable, and Tami couldn't help but feel like she was in the middle of a game she didn't fully understand. She cleared her throat, standing up from the table. "Malcolm," she said softly, her voice steady but firm. "Is everything all right?" Malcolm shot her a brief look, a flicker of unease passing through his eyes. He seemed to hesitate before answering, as if deciding whether or not to include her in the conversation. But the decision was made for him when the older man turned his gaze toward her. "You're the new partner, aren't you?" the man asked, his tone sharp. "Tami Hayes, right? The bookstore owner." Tami nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words. There was no judgment in his tone, not yet, but it was clear that he was sizing her up. She could feel his eyes on her, trying to figure out just how much she knew, how much influence she had. The man murmured, his lips curling into a slight, knowing smile. "I've heard of you. Nice little shop you've got there. But I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation here. Do you?" Tami felt her pulse quicken. She had heard the rumors before, about her family's wealth, about their ties to local businesses, but she had always managed to deflect them, to keep herself under the radar. This man, however, was different. He didn't seem to care about the surface details. He was digging deeper, looking for vulnerabilities. "I understand just fine," she said, her voice low and unwavering. "But maybe you're the one who doesn't understand. This cafe has been a part of this community for years. It's not just about money. It's about the people who rely on it." The man chuckled, but there was no humor in the sound. "People like you always think that way, don't they? All sentimental. But when it comes down to it, it's just business, sweetheart." The word sweetheart stung more than it should have, but Tami didn't let it show. She could feel Malcolm's discomfort, his reluctance to get drawn into whatever this man was planning. She knew then that he had been considering the offer, maybe not fully, but enough to let this conversation unfold. "I'm not sure I like the way you're speaking about this," Tami continued, her voice firm but controlled. "You think you can come in here and just take over, without any regard for what this cafe means to the people who come here every day? I'm not going to stand by and let that happen." The man's eyes narrowed, his smile fading. For a moment, there was silence, and in that silence, Tami felt the weight of his gaze. She had said the words, but the impact wasn't immediate. He was sizing her up, trying to gauge whether she was someone to be dismissed or someone who might put up a real fight. "Well, that's cute," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But I think you'll find that the people around here are more concerned about what's in their wallets than what's in their hearts." Tami's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter, but she didn't flinch. She didn't back down. She wasn't just a small-town bookstore owner anymore. She was part of this community now, and she wasn't going to let anyone tear it apart without a fight. Malcolm, still standing off to the side, cleared his throat. "Maybe we should continue this conversation later," he said, his voice strained. "I think we're done here for now." The man nodded curtly, his eyes still lingering on Tami as he turned to leave. "We'll see, Miss Hayes. We'll see." As the door chimed behind him, Tami let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She stood there for a moment trying to gather her thoughts. Her heart was still racing, but her mind was clear. She had just stepped into something much bigger than herself. She wasn't just a bookstore owner anymore. She wasn't just the quiet woman who paid for groceries in coins. She was Tami Hayes, and she had a stake in this town. And no one, no matter how much money they had, was going to take it from her. The events at the cafe weighed heavily on Tami's mind over the next few days. It wasn't just the conversation with the businessman. It was the realization that the town, the place she had lived in for so long, was changing, fast. And for the first time, she wasn't sure she had the luxury of remaining on the sidelines anymore. The cafe wasn't just a business. It was a piece of the town's heart, a gathering spot where people came to escape, to connect, to be a part of something larger than themselves. And now that very thing was in danger. Tami knew she had to do something, but what? She had spent so many years running from responsibility, from the expectations of others, from the weight of her own potential. For so long, she had been content to simply watch from the background. But now everything felt different. The ground beneath her was shifting, and she had a choice: step forward or stay hidden. It wasn't an easy decision, but Tami was starting to feel something stir deep inside of her. A strength that had always been there, buried beneath layers of doubt and fear. She had the ability to make a difference. She had the power to shape the future. She just had to believe it. That belief didn't come overnight, though. It came in small, almost imperceptible moments, like when she made the decision to walk into the cafe the next morning, not as a quiet observer but as a partner with a voice. It came when she sat at the table with Malcolm, laying out a plan for the future of the business. Using the knowledge she had gained from her years of running the bookstore, she knew what the people of this town wanted. She knew the importance of community, of connection, and she wasn't about to let someone like that businessman take that away. The conversation was difficult. At first, Malcolm seemed hesitant, unsure whether he was ready to fully commit to a new direction. But Tami stood her ground. She spoke from the heart, from the experience of years spent listening to the people who walked through the bookstore doors every day. She spoke about what the cafe meant to the town and how, if they wanted to succeed, they needed to honor that legacy. It wasn't just about making money, it was about staying true to the community they served. By the end of the meeting, Malcolm was nodding, his doubts slowly fading. "You're right, Tami. I've been so caught up in the business side of things that I forgot why we're doing this in the first place. It's not just about growth. It's about preserving what's good about this place." And that was the turning point. That was when Tami felt it. The surge of confidence that came from knowing she had made an impact, from knowing that she had taken a stand for something she believed in. Over the next few weeks, the town began to notice. People who had once dismissed her as the quiet, humble bookshop owner began to take her seriously. Word spread quickly that Tami was now involved in the cafe's expansion plans, and with it came a new kind of respect. People started to approach her differently, not with pity or judgment, but with genuine interest. The subtle whispers that had followed her for years slowly began to fade. And yet, there was still something she hadn't fully confronted, the judgment she had internalized over the years. The idea that she wasn't good enough, that she didn't deserve to be seen for who she truly was. It had been so ingrained in her that she didn't know how to let it go. But with every step she took, every decision she made, that self-doubt was slowly being replaced with something stronger: confidence. It wasn't about the Bugatti or the cafe or even the money. It was about her. Tami had always thought that humility meant staying small, staying quiet, and out of the way. But she was beginning to realize that true humility wasn't about hiding. It was about standing tall, knowing who you are, and using your gifts to make a difference in the world around you. One afternoon, as Tami walked through the town square on her way to the bookstore, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A group of women from the local church, who had once ignored her or looked at her with pity, were now waving at her. They smiled, their faces warm, and for the first time, Tami felt like she belonged. She stopped for a moment, meeting their gazes. A few of them greeted her by name, asking how the bookstore was doing, how the cafe plans were coming along. And for the first time, Tami didn't feel like she had to hide. She didn't feel the need to downplay her role, to shy away from the truth. She stood there, a quiet but confident force, and for once, she was fully present in the moment. "Things are going well," Tami replied with a smile. "The bookstore's doing great, and we've got some exciting things coming up with the cafe. I think it's going to be a good year for both." The women nodded, their faces reflecting genuine interest. "We've heard great things," one of them said, and Tami felt the words settle into her with a warmth she hadn't expected. "We're proud of you, Tami. You've really made a mark on this town." Tami smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, her heart swelling with gratitude. "That means a lot to me." As they parted ways, Tami's steps felt lighter. The doubt that had once weighed her down no longer seemed so heavy. She was starting to understand that the journey to confidence wasn't a straight path. It was a winding road with bumps and twists, moments of hesitation and self-doubt. But with every step forward, she was becoming the person she had always been meant to be. She wasn't just the quiet woman from the bookstore anymore. She was someone who had a voice, a purpose, and a future that was hers to shape. And for the first time in her life, She was ready to let the world see her for who she truly was. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Tami had never been one for attention. But now, as she worked alongside Malcolm on the expansion plans for the cafe, it felt like the whole town was watching. The cafe became a central hub for the community, and the changes they were making were more than just physical. They were symbolic of something larger, something Tami had only just started to realize. As Tami spent her days poring over business plans, meeting with potential investors, and working on marketing ideas, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her decision. She had chosen to step into the role of someone who led, someone who didn't shrink back into the shadows. And though it hadn't been easy, each step she took made her feel more certain, more grounded in the woman she was becoming. The cafe's renovation was going smoothly, and Tami was proud of the direction it was heading. But it wasn't just about the physical space, it was about the people it served. She remembered the conversations she'd had with the regulars, the ones who always had a familiar smile and a warm greeting for her. They were the reason she had taken this step in the first place. They were the ones who had silently, without even realizing it, encouraged her to stop hiding. One afternoon, while she was working in the cafe with Malcolm, an older woman named Mrs. Daniels, a longtime customer, approached her. Tami had known Mrs. Daniels for years. She was the kind of woman who always had a story to tell and a cup of coffee in hand. But today, there was something different in her eyes, something Tami couldn't quite place. "Hi, Mrs. Daniels," Tami said, greeting her with a smile. "What can I get you today?" The woman smiled warmly, but there was an odd tension in the air. She looked at Tami with a gaze that held more than just friendliness. "I've been meaning to tell you something," Mrs. Daniels said, her voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of emotion. "You've done something remarkable, Tami. You've changed this place for the better. And it's not just the cafe that's changed. It's you too." Tami blinked, taken aback by the sudden intensity in the older woman's voice. I don't know about that," Tami replied, though there was a faint warmth in her chest. "I'm just doing what I can." Mrs. Daniels shook her head, her eyes soft but serious. "No, Tami, you don't see it yet, but I do. I see how you've transformed." The woman who walked into this town years ago, keeping her head down, afraid to stand out, she's gone. And in her place is a woman who knows her worth, who isn't afraid to take charge, to stand up for what she believes in. And that, my dear, is more than any cafe expansion or business plan. It's a new beginning for you. Tami felt the weight of her words settle deep inside her. She hadn't realized how much her internal transformation had affected the people around her. The change wasn't just about her stepping into a new role in the cafe. It was about her embracing her own worth, her own power. For so long, she had downplayed who she was, hidden behind a mask of humility and self-doubt. But now, she was finally allowing herself to be seen, to be recognized for the strength she had always carried inside her. "Thank you, Mrs. Daniels," Tami said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That means more to me than you know." The older woman patted Tami's hand, her smile kind. "You don't need to thank me, child. You've earned it. Just keep going. Keep being the woman you were always meant to be." As Mrs. Daniels left, Tami stood there for a moment, the weight of her words echoing in her mind. She had come so far since that day in the grocery store when she had felt small and insignificant. She had come so far since she had hesitated to claim her place in this town, in this community. And now, for the first time, she felt like she was truly home. Later that week, Tami found herself sitting in the back room of the cafe, her thoughts swirling as she looked over the final draft of the cafe's expansion plan. The walls of the room felt warm with the light from the afternoon sun, and outside, the sound of the town going about its business echoed faintly. She felt at peace, as if the world was finally falling into place. But the peace she felt wasn't just about the cafe or the town. It was about her. It was about the quiet triumph she had earned by standing up for herself, by refusing to shrink back and hide. She had done the work. She had faced the fears, the doubts, and the judgment. And now she was finally free to be who she was meant to be. Malcolm walked in, a wide grin on his face. "We got the investment," he said, his voice full of excitement. "The deal is done. We're officially moving forward with the expansion. This cafe, it's going to be something great." Tami felt a surge of pride. She had helped make this happen. She had fought for it, fought for something bigger than herself. And now it was real. "I couldn't have done it without you, Tami," Malcolm added, his tone sincere. "You've been the heart of this project. Your vision, your ideas, this place is going to thrive because of you." Tami felt the weight of his words. He wasn't just talking about the business. He was talking about her. For so long, she had doubted herself, believed she wasn't enough. But now, she was hearing it from someone else. Someone who saw her. Someone who recognized her value. "Thank you, Malcolm," Tami said, her voice steady, but filled with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you either. You've taught me so much." They stood there for a moment, the weight of the achievement settling in. Tami knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges, more hurdles to overcome. But she was ready. She wasn't going to shrink back anymore. For the first time, she felt like she was truly stepping into her own power. Not as the quiet woman who had been overlooked, but as someone who had earned her place. Someone who deserved to be seen. The day the cafe officially reopened after its renovation felt like the first day of a new chapter. Tami had spent weeks watching the transformation unfold. Every decision, every idea, every shift contributing to something bigger than she had ever imagined. But now, standing at the threshold of the cafe, looking out over the bustling room filled with familiar faces, she couldn't help but marvel at the changes. Not just in the cafe but in herself. The cafe, with its fresh coat of paint and modern touches, still held the warmth that had always made it special. It was a balance of old and new, just like Tami. She had found a way to honor the past while embracing the future. The same warmth, the same sense of community, still lingered in the air. But now it had a little more room to breathe. The grand reopening was a success. More people had shown up than Tami had anticipated. Customers who had once only heard whispers of the changes were now stepping inside, drawn in by the buzz of excitement. Whole community that had come together to celebrate something bigger. Tami moved through the crowd, her smile genuine as she greeted the regulars and newcomers alike. She had always been a listener, always content to observe. But today, she was more than that. She was a part of the conversation now, an active participant in the growth and success of this town and the people who had supported her all these years. As she moved from table to table, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, she couldn't help but notice how differently people were treating her. There was no more dismissal, no more underestimation. People looked at her with respect now, with admiration. And it wasn't just because she was a partner in the cafe. It was because they saw her for who she truly was. The sound of the door opening caught her attention, and when she looked up, she saw Elaine walking in, her arms full of homemade pies and pastries, ready to contribute to the celebration. Tami grinned as she made her way toward her friend, grateful for her constant support. "You did it," Elaine said with a smile, setting down the pies on the counter. "Look at this place. It's packed. You've really made something incredible here." Tami smiled back, feeling the weight of her friend's words. "It's not just me, Elaine. It's the community. It's everyone who believed in this place." Elaine shook her head, a soft chuckle escaping her lips. "You're too humble. You're the one who made it happen. Don't sell yourself short." Tami's smile softened, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to accept the praise without brushing it aside. She had earned this. She had earned the respect, the acknowledgement, and the place she had carved out for herself in this town. Later in the afternoon, Tami stood by the window, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. The cafe was still full, the chatter lively, but the quiet stillness of the moment allowed her to reflect. She had come a long way from that woman who had once hidden behind her humility, the one who had quietly paid for groceries in coins, afraid to be seen for who she truly was. She thought about the years of self-doubt, the moments when she had questioned her worth, wondering if she was truly deserving of success. But those moments were behind her now. She wasn't just the bookstore owner, the woman who kept to herself. She wasn't the quiet, overlooked woman anymore. She was Tami Hayes, a force to be reckoned with, someone who had fought for her place and earned it. A few customers sat at the counter, chatting with Malcolm about the new menu items. The atmosphere was warm and familiar, but there was an undercurrent of something more. There was a sense of belonging, of ownership, something Tami had never allowed herself to feel before. She was part of this. She was more than just the sum of the quiet pieces of her life. She was someone who had a voice, a vision, and a future. The door chimed again, and Tami turned to see a familiar face. Mrs. Daniels walked in, her cane tapping softly against the floor. The moment she saw Tami, her face lit up with a smile, and she made her way over to the counter. Well, Mrs. Daniels said, her voice warm. I told you, didn't I? You've made something wonderful here, Tami. Tami felt a warmth spread through her chest as she looked at the older woman. Thank you, she said simply. It means the world to hear that. Mrs. Daniels gave her a wink. Don't let it go to your head now, she teased, her eyes twinkling with affection. But I'm proud of you, Tami. Proud of the woman you've become. This town is lucky to have you. For a moment, Tami couldn't find the words. Mrs. Daniels had always been one of the kindest souls in town, but hearing her say that felt like a small triumph in itself. It was the validation Tami had never realized she needed. Proof that the changes she had made, the transformation she had gone through, were visible to others. As Mrs. Daniels took a seat, Tami walked over to Malcolm, who was standing behind the counter, observing the scene. She could see the pride in his eyes, the same pride that filled her own chest. They had built something together. They had turned the cafe into more than just a business. It had become a symbol of resilience, of community, and of quiet power. You've done good, Tami, Malcolm said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. She looked around the cafe once more, the energy, the life that filled the space. We've done good, she corrected, meeting his gaze. It wasn't just the cafe that had changed. It was her. The quiet, reserved woman who had once been afraid to step forward had finally found her place. She had stepped into her own power, her own voice. And as she watched the cafe thrive, surrounded by people who had come to respect and appreciate her, she knew that this was just the beginning. Tami wasn't the woman she had been before. She wasn't the woman who was afraid of being seen, afraid of standing up for herself. She was a woman who had earned her place in this world, and she wasn't going to let anyone, or anything, take that away from her. Her journey had only just begun, but for the first time in her life, Tami Hayes knew who she was, and that was enough. The cafe was still buzzing with life, the sound of conversation and laughter filling the space, but Tami stepped back from the crowd, moving toward the back of the cafe. There, the noise faded, and the quiet settled around her like a blanket. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was peaceful, grounding. She stood by the window, her eyes tracing the horizon as the soft glow of the evening light filtered in, casting a golden hue across the room. For a moment, she allowed herself to just be, to breathe in the warmth of the day, the comfort of the people she had helped shape this space for. She thought about how far she'd come, the days when she hid behind her own self-doubt, when she couldn't bring herself to fully embrace the life she'd been given. But now, standing in the quiet of her own creation, she saw it all clearly. She had spent so many years hiding, thinking that being humble meant staying small. She had spent so long measuring her worth by the way others saw her, by the judgment, the laughter, the unspoken expectations. But now everything had changed. She wasn't just the quiet bookstore owner. She wasn't just the woman who paid for groceries in coins to avoid attention. She wasn't the woman who let fear and self-doubt hold her back. She was Tami Hayes, a woman who had faced her own fears, fought through the quiet resistance within her, and finally let herself step into her own power. The woman who had been overlooked for so long had become the heart of something bigger than herself. The cafe, her bookstore, the people in this town, all of it was a part of her, and she was a part of it. The door of the cafe opened, and Malcolm stepped inside, holding a takeout bag from a local deli. He looked at her, a soft smile playing on his lips. There was a look of understanding in his eyes, a recognition of the journey they had both been on. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I think this is the best we've done so far. Not just with the cafe, but with everything. I can't tell you how proud I am of how far you've come." Tami turned to face him, her own smile reflecting the warmth in her heart. "It wasn't just me," she said quietly. "It was all of us. We've built something together." Malcolm nodded. "True, but you've really stepped up, Tami, and I think the whole town can see it. They respect you more than you know." Tami let out a breath, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always thought respect had to be earned by doing more, by being louder, by showing off her success. But the truth was, she had earned respect by simply being herself, by embracing who she was, flaws and all. As Malcolm handed her the takeout bag, Tami looked around the room one last time, taking in the familiar faces, the new customers, the buzz of energy that filled the space. It wasn't just the cafe that had been transformed. It was her. She knew there would be challenges ahead. There would always be new hurdles to overcome, more decisions to make, more growth to pursue. But Tami no longer feared those challenges. She welcomed them. She had spent too long shrinking away, too long waiting for the world to recognize her. Now she was ready to stand in the light and claim her place. "I think we've just begun, Malcolm," she said, her voice steady, filled with a quiet certainty. "There's so much more to do, and I'm ready." Malcolm grinned, clearly proud of the woman standing before him. "I couldn't agree more. You're exactly where you're supposed to be." Tami smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She had come full circle. From the woman who once hid behind modesty to the woman who was now standing tall, fully embracing her life and everything that came with it. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, the last rays of light casting a warm glow over the cafe. Tami stood there for a moment, watching as the world outside continued on. But now she was a part of it. She wasn't just watching from the sidelines anymore. She had stepped into her own power and nothing, no one, could take that away.